Junitus 8th, 437. These days are like dragon's fire, for the summer heat always blasts around me every time I step outside. Luckily, I wake up early, well before dawn, although working over ovens makes up for the cooler temperatures. I'm usually finished with delivering to the command center about noon, so I'm spared most of the brunt of the summer heat. Things have been happening at a more rapid pace, and I fear for our sweet Reme. For starters, within the last month, the Skenderites have been pushing deeper into our country. I've heard in whispers that the enemy is within 15 miles of the capital. In the south, the Sortigians have recovered some of their lost land, but they're still only a third of what they once were. As for Lafer, the number of resistance instances have been dramatically increasing lately. The frequency of public executions have risen, and yet emboldened Remains have started attacking barracks at night, or they ambush isolated patrols. The streets of Lafer are even more dangerous at night, and anyone caught out after curfew is killed. The number of Skenderites stationed here has also risen. Ferries now travel across the width of the river daily, and multiple battalions are moving west. I will admit that the future feels so grim, especially because I've never once seen any contestation between actual armies. The Remain military didn't even fight for Lafer. They just surrendered us to the enemy. However, I wonder whether or not that was for our own benefit, because I've heard of the cities of Darvaux and Matin. Those cities are no longer Remain cities, as most of the innocents who lived in those places during the fighting were confused for enemy combatants. I've even heard that the few Remains who exist in the cities have been collected together in ghettos. By some weird miracle, Lafer has escaped that fate. Zumez. Junitus 12th, 437. There was a massive attack on the command center, where 105 Remain resistance fighters tried to assassinate General Wassendorf. Lieutenant Fizzo led the counterattack, and all 105 of my countrymen and countrywomen were killed. He is now Major Fizzo. Zumez. Junitus 20th, 437. The Remain resistance stole all of the grain and all of the flour from the Skenderite granaries, and so I cannot make any bread. While I have my reserves, if I continued to supply the Remains during a time of heightened scrutiny, I would be discovered. I'm sure a backlash will occur. Zemez. Junitus 29th, 437. So I did something foolish today. I may have sided with the Remain resistance. Let me explain. I brought my bread to the command center like I did every day, and like every day, I placed the shipment of bread in the kitchen. As I was coming back from the general's offices after dropping off my bread there, I heard a name I was familiar with. The name was Fletcher's Rest. Fletcher's Rest was a tavern in Lafer. As with most days, the door to the conference room was opened a crack, and I heard light conversation coming from within. I stopped in the middle of the hallway, for I knew the tavern. I had never been inside, but I knew it by reputation. To my knowledge, it had been closed during the occupation. General Walsendorf called the tavern a den of rats, one that would be exterminated very soon. I held my breath as I listened quietly and placed my back against the wall, besides the door. Sweat trailed down my back, and my heart sputtered. Apparently, even though all of the bars were supposed to have been closed, the Skenderites suspected the Fletcher's Rest was a secret base for the resistance. They were going to raid it tonight. I left as quickly as I could, and luckily no one stopped me or hindered my departure. Rather than head home, I moved through the back alleyways and found my way closer to the tavern. the Fletcher's Rest. However, a pair of rough-looking Remains jumped out and pinned me to the wall. A dagger was pointed at my throat, and they asked me what I was doing there. I was so scared, and yet I knew what I had to do. I whispered, if the Fletcher's Rest was a secret resistance hideout, then they were all in danger because the Skenderites knew about it. It was going to be raided tonight. The blade was pressed harder against my throat, and yet both men said nothing. They just glared at me, and so I gazed back at them. After a minute, they let me off the wall, and then told me they had no idea what I was talking about. More importantly, they told me never to come back to that area again. I had never seen these men before, and I was confident that they were not native Lefarians. I didn't want to argue, though, and I returned home. It was intensely quiet in my home, and I just sat there waiting for something to happen. I just wasn't sure what it was. Zumez. Junitus 30th. The Skenderites were tense today, because each of the barracks I delivered to seemed agitated. The command center was especially busy with activity, and I wasn't allowed entry. The bread was taken at the door, and I was sent home. I heard from other Remains that some place was raided last night, but it was empty. My insides trembled as I closed the door for the night, wondering what would happen. What if the Skenderites discovered it was I who foiled their plans? Hopefully, the pair of thugs would forget what I looked like. I'm just a simple baker, nothing more. I could never be a ruthless killer, even for our sweet Remay. However, I made my choice, and perhaps in the near future, I wouldn't be just a simple baker. I could very well possibly be hung for my interference. But I don't care. I had to do something to aid my countrymen and countrywomen. Whereas I can't fight against the Skenderites, I at least helped those who choose to. Zumez. Julitus 3rd, 437. Today started out like all the others that came before it. But by the end, I would be forever changed. I went about my normal routine, delivering bread to each of the barracks. When I got to the command center, I dropped off my regular order to the kitchen, although I was no longer allowed to deliver bread to the general's offices. I don't think I was discovered, but the security in and around the command center is way more tight today than it was in the past. When I returned about mid-afternoon, I found a man inside my home. It was the same man who I had seen on the lone street every 3 days, and the same man who stopped me from joining in to try and save Filippio St. Grenard. What was more surprising was that he was seated at my table, and he was reading my journal, the very one I'm writing in right now. He closed it, and then handed it back to me before gesturing that I take a seat at my own kitchen table. I kept glancing about nervously, but he assured me that he meant me no harm. Firstly, he introduced himself to me as Jonas Luke, and he was a member of the Resistance. Now, I want to make something perfectly clear. The name that the man had told me was not Jonas Luke, but it will appear as such in this journal. This is for his safety, although I honestly suspect that he gave me an alias anyway. Jonas Luke thanked me for tipping off his comrades about the raid. He asked me why I did it, though. I explained to him that I was no warrior, but my late sister Gwenda was. She was a soldier in Darvaux, and she fought for our beloved country. I love Remay as well, although I lack the courage or aptitude to fight. I told him that I tipped them off because I couldn't stand by and let more Remayans die if I had the power to do something. I expressed I was nothing more than a simple baker, and Jonas laughed at me. He told me that he had read the journal, including the Junitus 30th 437 entry. Jonas Luke had brought up the fact that I had stolen flour from the Skenderites, and that I ensured that the people still had food to eat, even at the potential risk of my own life. That had been true, but I failed to see how it was special. But Jonas said it was. He assured me that I was more than just a baker, and I was just as much a fighter for the country as he was. While I did not engage in combat, I performed a function far more precious than that. Then he asked me a question that would forever change the course of my life. He asked me to join the resistance, not as a fighter or warrior, but as a feeder of the people, an observer of the Skenderites, and as a spy who gathered intelligence. It was no more dangerous than what I had been doing, and he promised on my sister's name that he would never ask me to fight. Jonas Luke went on to tell me many things. He told me that the resistance was based out of Starlo, and a majority of the resistance activities were scattered in many villages spread throughout the Remayan countryside. He told me things were getting bad, but he and his allies refused to lay down and let Remay be consumed without a fight. He told me I had the same rebellious spirit he did, and so once more he asked me to join him. Jonas Luke was right. I am a proud Remayan who had been standing for my people with the gifts that I had and the opportunities I could exploit. In the end, I agreed and vowed to serve the resistance the best I could. For better or worse, I've pledged myself for the freedom of Remay. Long live Remay! Long live the resistance! Zumez.